It was really a reflection or an echo of the lectures we had this morning previously. And it was about the necessity of creating and communicating the value adequately to stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean pretty much everyone. Is the audience, is the government, is the private sponsors, there are other institutions with which you can work or not. And the discussion went very rich towards the direction of, do we need to put a name or a tag or a label in everything we do? I mean, do we need a thorough set of terminologies for whatever we try to develop in our works? Because I think the group almost agreed that not really is nice to have, but not really is not fundamental. And more important is to have better understanding on why you exist as an organization and why you chose to do this kind of work, either as an individual or entrepreneur or an organization manager.
I guess foremost what I was thinking about was around the language that we use to communicate the value of the arts, the intrinsic value of the arts, and how that can be so quite complex to think about in terms of different audience and different stakeholders, when how we experience art is inherently subjective. So to think about ways of communicating the value of the arts with regard to language. And from leading on from that discussion, we had an interesting kind of elaboration around how the intrinsic measures of the arts are, again, something we all, or the intrinsic value of the arts is something that we all know in terms of how we can communicate that to the necessary funders and stakeholders at the moment is a challenge. And a concept that kind of resonated with us are looking at the longitudinal studies and this concept that was raised this morning about deep time. So how can we engage in really meaningful evaluation about the role and value of the arts and the impact of the arts over a period of time, because it does take generations. We all know that from working within institutions. With relevance to thinking about longitudinal studies, what can we learn from the social sciences? What practices are there that we can borrow to apply to the arts too? Thinking about the instrumental value of the arts, this is an argument that we all use within our organisations, to run our organisations. It's necessary to think about numbers and quantifiables for government funding, for talking to philanthropists, but it's not necessarily it's not the core of what the value is. So that can also limit us sometimes in our thinking, because we're thinking always maybe 1 or 2 year cycles ahead. And making those economic arguments to government. But what we're all really passionate about is how to communicate with as diverse and wide a sector as possible the intrinsic value of the arts.
Most of all, for me, was important the theme of change management and gaps between generations, because in post-Soviet unions we have huge issues because of this. One thing was about values, what is very strange in Georgia, the question why. Because many governmental organizations like ministries and City Hall and others, they don't understand why do they have to fund and develop different fields of culture. So I think that this evaluation of values are very important for the society, for the government, and I think that communication must be very clear between them to have the real products on face.
We discussed about the values of the stuff or the things that we collect, that we put in museums, that we consider as heritage, or we define as important for what we're doing in terms of archiving today. And here I found the discussion very interesting in terms of redefining what was valuable and recontextualizing what was valuable in different times and how we use them today. Most of the discussion was, of course, focused on what we are doing now, because we are all concerned about defining and all the time redefining the value of our work and how do we communicate it towards our audience, our stakeholders, stakeholders, the funders and the artists, the producers we are working with. So of course most of the discussion was concentrated on that. What I found also interesting was that throughout the discussion we referred a lot to the future, and we tried to predict somehow how our work today could be considered as heritage in the future, or how important it is to just focus on the moment, on the present time, and make sure our audience gets that, not necessarily in terms of what could be valuable tomorrow. So throughout this relation between present, future and past, not necessarily in this order, what we try to define and redefine the value of arts and culture and our work today.
In our group, we had a somewhat protracted introductions round where we sort of shared our passions, and what became clear is that there are a lot of infrastructural issues that need to be addressed. Getting people working together, getting people to know what the best practices are, how to innovate beyond sort of standard methodologies of cultural management and also cultural production, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the main things that came out of the discussions that we had today was the idea that there are various sectors and various sections of the culture sector in the culture and arts field that are not engaging in discussion and debate with each other. For example, public policy makers or cultural policy makers and government funders versus the more commercial art fairs and galleries in the most commercial sector, and the nonprofit NGO advocacy groups or the grassroots groups that we see. There's very little discussion that actually between these three groups that try to actually hash out some of the problems. Usually even in the meetings that we're having today and the sessions that we've had over the past day or so, we see that there's a lot of discussion about each of these groups as the other, but there's little dialogue between them about how to solve specific issues. Taking actual concrete experiences that we've had and exploring the processes that took place for those activities, to have to see what happened, how it happened, mm-hmm. why it succeeded, why it failed, and then take some lessons learned. Mm-hmm. We can't expect to have a universal, a global solution to our cultural policy developments or our art funding from the public sector or from private donors. What we need to do is to incorporate relativism in the arguments that we're having, that each region, each country, each situation is specific to itself, in addition to being able to really tackle the empirical on the ground challenges. I mean, if we are going to public policy experts, we need to hear it from their side. How is it that we lose your attention? Why is it that other things become a priority? And the argument that, investing in culture and arts is investing in the future, yes, we agree with that. But so is investing in education, investing in the health sciences, investing in a lot of other sectors of society will eventually, we'll be able to reap more and more benefits of it. So we need stronger arguments, but not necessarily arguments, but actually empirical activity that we've done.
Yeah, that was
would be able to do that.
Yeah, that was a sentiment that kind of came out, was that we can spend less time talking and more time making with each other.
Right.
And that in that making process, prototype future network structures, future protocols, future policies, and really test them out. And I think from my personal experience, the best way that happens is when as many stakeholders as possible are all there together, so that those prototypes can be a realistic reflection. So if you only have policy people in a room talking about a new policy, but it affects artists and there's no artists in the room, you're not going to develop a very robust policy.
It turns into a monologue that's basically a group of people that already agree with each other, that are discussing the same matters over and over again. If we are talking about, for example, the art scene in Africa, and if we have nobody from the biennales and we have nobody from the galleries that are selling these artworks, then how can we engage in that conversation when the parties are not even involved?